Trapped, a tale of survival, fear, and human frailty. Chapter 1. Shadows over Fernwood. Avery, Ben, Clara, and Dylan had known each other for years. Not because they were close, but because in a town like theirs, paths crossed whether you wanted them to or not. They weren't childhood best friends. They were just the people still around, still willing to take risks when everyone else had settled into predictable lives. Fernwood Mine had been their obsession since they were kids, but it wasn't a game anymore. The mine was dangerous, condemned. Signs warned against entry, but that never stopped anyone who thought they were smarter than those who had come before. The legend of Old Miner Jack had always loomed over the town. He had supposedly found gold, but disappeared before he could retrieve it. His notes were scattered through old journals, kept by collectors and drunks who had claimed to know him. Dylan had pieced together what they needed: a rough map, cryptic instructions, and a growing sense of inevitability. Ben led the group. He always had. Charismatic, arrogant, and just reckless enough to make people believe he knew what he was doing. He wasn't interested in gold, he wanted the glory of the discovery. Clara, pragmatic and sharp, kept them grounded. She had an answer for everything, a voice of reason, often drowned out by the others' excitement. Avery was cautious, but she followed because it was easier than fighting against them. And Dylan was the wild card, the one who had spent months planning this trip, his engineering knowledge giving the others false confidence. They set out in the morning, the crisp mountain air, a stark contrast to the weight of their plan. The mine entrance gaped like a mouth in the hillside, swallowing the light beyond its threshold. It was time. Chapter 2. The Collapse. Navigating the tunnels was easier than expected. The beams held firm, the ground dry beneath their boots. There was no eerie whisper of ghosts, just silence, pressing against them like the weight of the mountain itself.
"This is it,"
Dylan murmured, brushing dust from a section of the wall. His voice echoed, making the space seem larger than it was. He adjusted his backpack, pulling out the small seismic charges he had brought along.
"A small controlled blast should loosen things up. We'll see if there's a chamber behind this."
Are we sure this is a good idea?
Avery hesitated.
"Oh, come on, we've come this far."
Ben rolled his eyes. Clara frowned but didn't protest. Dylan set the charge and pressed the detonator. A dull boom rolled through the mine, sending a tremor beneath their feet. Dust exploded into the air, making them cough. The silence that followed was tense, expectant. Then came the sound they hadn't accounted for. A groan, deep and ancient, like the earth itself was shifting. Then the tunnel collapsed. The world turned into chaos, rocks crashing, the floor trembling, a thunderous roar that swallowed their screams. Avery was thrown to the ground. Something slammed into her shoulder. She curled into herself, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for it to end. And then, silence. She opened her eyes to suffocating darkness. Someone coughed. A flashlight flickered to life. Shadows danced against the jagged walls. The entrance was gone. A thick wall of rock now sealed them inside. They were trapped. Chapter 3. Fear and blame. Panic set in fast.
Jesus Christ.
Clara muttered, pressing herself against the rockfall. She pounded against it, knowing it was useless.
No.
Ben stood in stunned silence, his breath coming in short gasps. Dylan was on his knees, running his hands through his hair.
That wasn't supposed to happen."
Avery shook. She tried to steady her breathing, but the weight of the rock pressing around them felt like it was crushing her chest.
"What the hell did you do?"
Ben rounded on Dylan.
"It was a controlled charge. The structure must have been weaker than I thought."
Dylan looked up, eyes wide.
"You thought? You nearly killed us, you idiot."
Ben grabbed him by the collar.
Not helping.
Clara shoved them apart. The flashlight beam shook in Avery's hands.
We need to think. We need to find a way out.
Silence. Ben turned away, hands on his hips, breathing hard.
"How much food do we have?"
Not enough.
Clara said bluntly. Dylan wiped sweat from his brow.
"We have air. That means there has to be a way out. If there was no ventilation, we'd already be struggling to breathe."
It wasn't comforting. Avery's fingers brushed against her pocket, feeling her phone. No signal, of course. They were deep underground. They had no choice but to move forward. Chapter 4. The reality of survival. They rationed their water, keeping their movements slow. Every time they stopped, the silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Dylan fumbled with the metal detector, trying to use it as a distress beacon.
If anyone's scanning for signals, this might help.
If someone's even looking.
Clara was doubtful. As the hours stretched on, their initial panic faded into cold, creeping dread. The mine was a labyrinth of dead ends and collapsed tunnels. The deeper they went, the more their minds twisted around their fears. Ben began pacing. Clara snapped at him to stop wasting energy. Avery listened to the silence, hearing things that weren't there. The whisper of air moving through unseen cracks, the creak of stone settling above them. The distant echo of something shifting. She didn't mention it. They argued about what to do. Ben wanted to force their way through the collapse, but Dylan swore it was impossible. Clara wanted to search for an old exit, but their map was incomplete.
Then what do we do?
Avery asked.
Just wait?
No one had an answer. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. Time passed in a haze. They rested in shifts, their bodies pressed together for warmth. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. Their throats burned from dust and thirst. The silence became unbearable. Clara accused Dylan of leading them into this mess. Dylan fired back that Ben was the one who pushed them forward. Ben snapped that Avery hadn't done a damn thing to stop them.
I knew this would happen.
Avery whispered. It wasn't true, but it felt true. The mind plays tricks in the dark. Shapes moved in the corners of their eyes. Shadows breathed when no one spoke. Then Dylan gasped.
I feel a draft.
They followed it, stumbling over rocks, hope sparking in their chests. The tunnel narrowed, then a sliver of light. Not an exit, but an old ventilation shaft, partially collapsed. If they could widen it, Clara clawed at the rocks, nails breaking. Ben and Dylan joined her, desperation taking over. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, space. Just enough. Ben shoved his way through first. Clara followed. Dylan next. Avery hesitated. The walls felt too close. Her breath came short. Then Clara grabbed her arm.
Come on.
She closed her eyes and pushed forward. And then cold air. They collapsed onto the mountain slope, gasping for breath. Free. Alive. Changed. Epilogue. Aftermath. They never spoke about what happened. Not really. Dylan left town. Ben stopped taking risks. Clara refused to talk about the mine. Avery dreamt of the darkness for years. Somewhere beneath the mountain, old miner Jack's treasure remained untouched. But they knew the truth. Gold had never been the real danger. The mine had shown them what people truly were when the walls closed in, and they would never be the same.